Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to another episode of the Holistic Center. And this is going to be a special episode. As you can see, this is the real background. This is my garden, and you might see in it once in a while my two boys, aka Kyoto, under the table right now with a ball, and Chumley with his other ball. And you can see now Kyoto peeking here, his head. They just they want to have fun. Oh my goodness, those faces. Anyway, my name is Nicolas, and I am your host on this podcast. And today I wanted to have a different podcast. I wanted to talk about one of the oldest drink that we have on this planet continuously over probably thousands of years. In fact, so old that we don't really know how it came about and how it was discovered. I'm talking about tea. Indeed, tea is widely drunk all over the planet. In fact, yes, Kyoto, we'll play later. In fact, water is the most drunk liquid on this planet, but it's followed by tea. Tea is the second most drunk liquid on this planet. And do you know what number three is? Soda. No, not coffee, soda. It's disgusting. And then after that, it is coffee. So the benefits of tea are astronomical. And of course, they've been well recorded in China for many, many, many years. A lot of universities have used it. And so it's really interesting because tea comes from one plant. It's a camellia, the same camellias that you might have here in the garden that bloom, except that it's a special type of camellia. Usually it's under the same type of Camellia sinensis. And then within that, there are a few varieties. The one that we're interested in is mostly Camellia sinensis, and of course, Camellia sinensis var assam, two different plants that grow in two different places but of the same Camellia family. Now, tea comes into roughly six different types of tea or sorts of tea, and it all depends on how they're prepared and processed. Of course, you might have heard of white tea. That is, well, it's not really processed tea. You take the new bud that are blooming right now, actually around March, April, and then you just let them dry in the air and you consume it. You can only steep it for about once, maybe twice if you have a very refined palate, and the water has to be about 140, 150 Fahrenheit. Hopefully, I'll try to convert this for centigrades for those of you who are out there. The next type of tea is green tea, as you might have heard. Japanese green tea and Chinese green teas. They do it differently. In China, they roast the tea on a big wok, and in Japan, they steam the tea, and that's why you get such different flavors from those two teas. In China, the tea is a little bit more roasted, so you're going to feel that roastiness to it, and in China, you're going to feel that herby taste, and that's because, well, it's steamed. They're prepared very differently, and of course, I'm not going to get into matcha and all of these. These are also ancient traditions. By the way, matcha also came from China. All of the tea making that you see all over the world really started in China, and it started from two different spots in China. In the north, you have the more green types of tea. You have that Camellia sinensis plant that grows at a certain level, about 1,500 meters on slopes. And in the south, you have the Camellia sinensis var assam, a much bigger leaf that grows in the more warmer and more humid parts of China that do different types of tea. So after this green tea, what you do is, you roast it for a little while or you steam for a little while, then you put it to the side. And in the case of Japanese green tea, you've got to drink it as soon as possible because it loses it starts to oxidize basically. And that's really what processing tea is about, is you want to just work on that oxidization so that it stops at the right moment. So if you are going to roast tea a little bit longer, now you step into what we call oolong. And oolongs are amazing tea. Now, the one country that's very famous for oolong is Taiwan. And if you ever want to try some really good oolongs, try the ones that have GABA, or done in a way that produces GABA, GABA. That is great for the gut. We'll get to the health benefits a little bit after. And so oolongs can come in different shapes and forms. You can have what they call green oolong and dark oolong, and that's just a way of how long you're going to roast that. So if green tea is about roasted anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, maybe, depending on exactly where, when, and how, or steamed. Oolong is going to be roasted a little bit longer, about 15, 20 minutes or so, again depending on very different types of ways of making it. And right after oolong, now you step into another tea, and this is the one tea that I love and I favor, and that's pu'er. And pu'er is a semi-fermented tea that is was made famous in the southwest of China, Yunnan, and of course, it's also done in other countries around that, and it has different flavor profiles. Now, interestingly enough, pu'er wasn't a sophisticated drink at the time. It was kind of like, the peasant's drink. But as the Qing dynasty took over China, these guys were, more from the Mongolian steppes. They were used to that kind of tea that was prevalent in all that part of the world. It was made famous. So eventually the Han accepted it as a tea, especially as the Han started moving southwest and took over plantations. So pu'er is really interesting because you'll probably roast it anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes, again, depending on what kind of tea you do. And it's also very seasonal, so you want to get them as much as possible in the springtime, but you can also get it in the summertime and in the fall. And they have very different flavor profiles. In the fall, it's going to be a little bit more astringent, a little bit more a bite to the tongue. We call it mouthfeel. So after pu'er, oh yes, before we go, pu'er comes in two flavors, and it comes in what we call ripe pu'er and raw pu'er. In fact, I have a ripe pu'er here. We'll open pretty soon, and I'll explain what it is. Ripe pu'er is, again, so you've plucked the leaves, you've dried them out in the sun, which you do with everything else, but then you roast them. So that's the difference between white tea that doesn't get roasted, just like green tea, but you're going to roast it a little bit more than oolong. And then after that, once you stop that oxidization of the leaf, you're going to store it. And these pu'ers can be stored anywhere from 6 months to decades. So people who are really into pu'ers will try to get the pu'ers that are before 2008, because before 2008, Yunnan did not use pesticides. It did after, but it stopped again in 2016. Anyway, so if you can get pu'ers from before 2008 and ideally the mid 90s, you can get some really fine pu'ers. And so what happens is, as the pu'er ages, the taste just becomes like a good scotch, like a good wine. It just becomes amazing. It loses a lot of its caffeine, or tein, I guess we should say, and it just becomes so refined. It's almost like a nectar. And it's funny because we often talk about oolong is the champagne of the tea. Well, I would say by far pu'er is a nectar of the tea. So after pu'er, if you continue roasting your leaves for, let's say, 40 to 50 minutes, now you get into the black teas and what the Chinese call red tea. So that is another type of tea. I like some of them. I don't like some of them. I like the smokiness, actually. So the Lapsang Souchong, or the kind of pine needle burn teas, I just love that. There is another and final last tea, and it's called yellow tea. And this is very rare to find, very expensive to find, because only a few people still remember how to do it correctly. Now, there are lots of fakey doos out there. You can get some that are really good. Actually, I got some from the Path of Cha and Yunnan sourcing, and it was very good. And so yellow tea is almost a mixture of green tea and pu'er. The process is very convoluted. There's a lot of roasting, putting to the side, roasting, putting it to the side, almost like French fries in Belgium. There's definitely a way of doing it, and it is absolutely fantastic. So perhaps that would be the nectar of tea, but pu'er is the elixir of tea, and oolong is the champagne of tea. So I have a tea master in Guangzhou, and the teas are really interesting in China. So you get two different types of presenting teas, maybe three different types. You get loose leaves, which great for everyday drinking, but you also get pressed tea, mostly, by the way, oolong, pu'ers, and black teas. And the reason is that, well, in order to bring tea far away, it's better to compress it into what we call a cake or a brick, virtually a brick. And the reason is that we're going to use the Tibetans as an example here. The Tibetans, who live very far up, or there are no trees, there's very little vegetation. They ate a lot of greasy meats just to survive, but they also needed that vegetable intake, and that was done by buying tea from the lower valleys in Guangzhou and Yunnan. So these teas were mostly pu'ers because that's the closest thing to Tibet. And yes, by the way, Pu'er is a village. That's kind of the village that gave the name to that sort of tea. And just like a terroir in France for wine, different parts of the Yunnan Valley have different tastes, and it can get extremely precise, just like wine can be, and scotch and everything else. So the Tibetans would, of course, order a lot of tea, and in order to bring a lot of tea up that very steep trek up the Himalayas, the tea was compacted into bricks. In fact, it was currency, and still up until maybe a decade or so ago, it was still a currency with some of the tribes in Tibet buying from those tea makers further down in the Yunnan Valley. So it's really a fascinating story. You might have heard the story of tea is really interesting. When the English went to China, they wanted to take this tea back to Europe. But before them, the Portuguese were the first ones who introduced tea to the rest of the world. Of course, Portugal first, but then it spread all the way up to England. There are some really funny stories about that because the Chinese are wonderful, amazing business people. They didn't want to give the tea plants away. They didn't want to give the Camellia sinensis away. So the Europeans thought they were buying Camellia sinensis, and they would get to Europe, and these beautiful camellia plants, not Camellia sinensis, had bloomed, and they thought, wow, this is beautiful. That's why we have camellias right here in the US, in Europe, because the Chinese were not that willing to give away the secrets. In fact, they were so not willing to give the secrets away that it infuriated the English, who had a lot of tea investments. They wanted to bring back tea to Europe. And so, what they actually did is they went out and stole some of these Camellia sinensis plants, and they brought them out to India, right around the Kashmir Indian border, to plant those Camellia sinensis varasam. And that's why English tea is usually darker. You don't get any light tea like green tea. You get more like the darker oolongs, the darker teas. And that's also why the Indians drink tea very differently than the Chinese do. It's usually much darker. It's much hotter. It's been steeped much longer. And of course, they add all sorts of spices in it, which are absolutely phenomenal. But that's also why the English drink their tea fairly hot and fairly dark. And that's something the Chinese just don't usually do. But there is an exception, and I'll get to it, especially with pu'ers. In fact, I forgot to tell you about the other pu'er part, but bear with me. It's such an exciting topic that I lose track of it. So they stole that, and it was a Scot who did that and brought it over there because the English didn't really care so much for the very light tea that the Chinese were drinking. They called it insipid. Well, that's because their taste buds weren't used to it. But once you have really good high-end Chinese green tea, it is anything but insipid. So I told you about the ripe pu'er, the pu'er that's aged naturally, and there's also a different type of pu'er, and that's the raw pu'er, is the one that's aged naturally, and usually it comes in a green pocket or it has a green label on it. But there's also another one called ripe pu'er, and that usually comes in a right pocket or has some sort of right writing on it. Now, this is an interesting story because ripe pu'er was not a Chinese invention. In fact, it was when the Liberation Army was marching all over China, taking over all the provinces and everything. A lot of the Chinese people left for Hong Kong and Taiwan. And in Taiwan, they really perfected oolong to a point where nobody really touches them all that much. But in Hong Kong, they wanted their pu'er and they couldn't let it age long enough to taste it. So they thought, what can we do to accelerate this aging process? So what they decided to do was to spray a little bit of water on the leaves that were drying, put some sort of plastic tarp over it, and voila, you had an accelerated aging of the tea. And so the tea is very different. So think of traditional tea being, very yellowish, emberish in color. Ripe pu'er is very dark. In fact, it can get as dark as coffee if you make it. And it has a very different taste, very subtle different taste. So Raw pu'er is going to be more on the initial astringency of tea. It's going to be very delicate, depending on what, where, and how, and especially when it was picked. But ripe pu'er is going to be much more. Think of a walk in a forest after rainfall, and a little bit of mushroomy, wet wood kind of feel and taste to it, and it's really delicious. Finally, I got to say everything. Now let's talk about how tea is prepared and how it comes in China, or at least the pu'er, which I'm very keen about. So it comes in a pocket like this, and then you open it up and you have your cake. And you can see here, this is a very traditional cake. The numbers here are interesting because they give you an idea of how the Chinese have been processing their teas for a few hundred years now. These numbers, especially these first numbers right here, are the basic recipe for basic raw pu'er. And ripe pu'er has a different number, and it will come in a usually red packet. So this is the tea from my tea master. His name is Mr. 18, and he has some pretty spectacular pu'er. So it's really difficult to open it up for the first time, and I realized I forgot something. I forgot my tea picker. So I'm going to first open it up, and it just takes ripping away that beautiful work that was done. And you should, I don't know if you can see the detail of the presentation. This is very Asian. There's just such a, it's superb. Superb. It usually comes with a piece of paper that explains what you are doing. So this is called a cake. And you notice there's a little indentation here. Well, that's because we don't want too much humidity staying here, especially when it is compressed. So it's compressed like a mushroom. Now, it can come as a cake, like I said, or also what they call tuosha, which is a very small version of this. Sometimes it might even look like a mushroom. And once you open it up, this is the part that you can never do as well again before. After that, you have the actual tea itself. And this is pu'er. This is a pu'er cake. Usually it has something that's well embedded in there. And there you go. So I'm going to now get the part I forgot to get before, the tea picker, because you don't just break it off. Well, most of the time you don't. Okay, and so I finally have my tea picker. Now this is a utensil. I don't know if you can see how well. It's a utensil that's designed specifically to break the tea. And so you're going to break it as such. You're going to break it from the inside right here. And you're going to just wedge that pick in there and slowly pry it away. Now, there's a whole reason why we do that. The reason is that you don't want to break the leaves as much as possible. Some teas are more packed than others. Some teas are looser than others. This really depends mostly on where it's done, how it's processed, and how it is. In fact, I'm going to start getting the water warmed up now so that we can have our tea. And usually you want to do about 5 to 7 grams of tea, and don't worry about it too much. Some people use a little scale and they go really down to the exact weight and use a little bit more than that. There we go. And so there you go. So now you've already started digging into the tea, and this is what it should start to look like at this point. And making sure to put away that pick. And by the way, you will hurt yourself with a pick. It's just the way it is. I put about, I don't know if you can, probably can't see it very well. This is how much tea I will put into my special tea kettle. Now these tea kettles are special. They're made specifically for pu'er, and the reason here is that there's still some from last time. The reason is that they are here. They're made in a way to keep the heat in as long as possible, but we want to control how it is steeped and how long it stays in there, and everything that it does. You don't want to over steep the tea. This is, by the way, one of the biggest problems that people have with tea, and that's also why a lot of times you'll hear people say, I hate tea. Yeah, of course. Well, because you've over steeped it, the water was too hot, it became not astringent anymore, but bitter. So what I do is I wait till the water just starts right before it starts to boil, you have that, you can hear it in the water, and that will give you your clue that you want to you want to use that water. Oh yeah, maybe I should probably also say that. Remember how with white tea you want it to be at about 140 Fahrenheit? Well, with green tea, it depends. I like Japanese green teas that are very subtle to be at about 150, but some Chinese green teas you can go up to 165. Oolong is best between 165 to about 185. And remember how you steep green tea maybe once, maybe twice? You don't want to steep it too long either. Usually about a minute is good. You'll get most of it anywhere within a minute. The second steep, of course, you can leave it as long as you want, as long as you taste something. Green tea, you might steep it maybe two, three, maybe four times, depending on what kind of tea it is. And again, depending on how subtle your taste buds are. Well, oolong, you want to steep it for 4 minutes and just leave it like that. And that's why it's important to put just enough tea. You don't want to put too much tea so that it becomes overwhelming and eventually more than astringent bitter, but just right. With pu'er, you want to start with, 5 to 7 grams are just perfect for that. And once the water is almost boiling, you want to pour that water into your special cup, your special kettle called yixing in China. And you want to wait. Usually, the first flush, by the way, I don't do traditional Gong Fu style. The first flush, which is the first steep, you throw it out. You throw it on top of all of your tea kettles and everything. And the second one, we're going to assume this is the second one. This is the one you wait. I don't wait more than 10 seconds and I pour it out directly. And this is how you can get your tea just right. And you notice there's a special way of holding it, like I am right now. And some traditions have you pour it in a circle. Counterclockwise is supposed to make it sweeter. That's up to you to find out by yourself. And there you go. Now, this is the pouring cup. This is the yixing, the tea kettle. Guess what I forgot? The cup, the drinking cup. And well, there's Chumley there. He just got his ball. All right, so we talked about the yixing, we talked about the pouring cup, and after that, well, you pour it into your drinking cup. And if you've got more than yourself, you'll be pouring it in all of the cups. Now, what I'm doing here is loosely called Gong Fu. It's the art of pouring tea, but I kind of call it Western Gong Fu because I don't have my little animal. I don't have a lot of things that I should be normally doing. I don't really wash the tea. The reason is that some teas need to be washed because especially the ripe teas pretty much on a hanger inside where people walk with their shoes, so there's dust going in there and everything. I happen to know where this tea comes from, so it doesn't really need washing or rinsing, and you can pretty much drink the very first cup. I wish I could show you. I can't show you what it looks like. Yeah, well, too bad. It looks amber. I guess that's the best way to call it. Honey amber is the look of the tea, and it tastes. Oh, it's amazing. It's a unique taste. You just have to try it, but you got to do it well. And next, we're going to talk about how do you do good tea. Still my favorite tea. Oh yeah. It's such a unique tea, Pu'er. Now, Pu'er is pretty amazing because it's great for digestion. And in fact, when I used to go to China, after a heavy meal, we had Pu'er. And not a digestive, not a cognac or something like that. The Chinese have alcohol, that's not the problem. It just, we didn't have that after dinner because Pu'er does exactly that, helps you digest. Now, specifically, you'll notice that people who drink tea and coffee too, by the way, tend to be a little bit leaner than people who drink sodas. There's a reason for that one, and it's pretty obvious by now if you haven't figured out that sodas are pretty much a lot of sugar. Well, there's no sugar here. Yes, you do not put sugar in pu'er, or in fact, any tea should not have any sugar in it or milk. That's an English invention, which is fine. I actually I do like Earl Grey, but I don't like flavored teas. It's just my taste. So Let's talk about also the price of these guys, and take the time to smell it after you've done it. It's so unique. These little guys are easily $100 to $125, and they can go up to $500. And if you get a master craftsman, usually done by hand, they can go well above that. Of course, if you know anything about pottery, different clay will do different things. But when it comes to pu'er, you need a special kind of shape and a special kind of clay. You want a clay that's a little bit porous, and you want a shape that, again, keeps that heat in like this. Now, if you've noticed, Japanese tea kettles are flat and elongated because you want the heat to dissipate as quickly as possible. It's the opposite with pu'er. When it comes to pu'er, remember with white tea, you drink it, you just pour it once, you steep it once, and that's it, maybe two if you're lucky. Green tea, 3 to 4 times. Oolong, you can do it a little bit more. Pu'er, you can actually do this, what I just did now, the steeping, the waiting, 10 times, 15 times, depending on your taste buds. So the first time when you pour it, when you actually pour yourself a cup of tea, yes, you want to do it for about 5 to 7 seconds. So it's easy, 5 to 7 grams, 5 to 7 seconds. But then the next time you want to go a little bit longer. And here's the reason. The Chinese think about it this way: those tea leaves are dormant. They've been compressed, they've been put to the side for months to years to decades. They are asleep. So that first pour really wakes them up. That's the waking up of the tea. That second pour, and especially the third and the fourth and the fifth, are the ones where you really start to taste the tea. And this is where you see the tea unfolding all of its flavor profiles. It is absolutely spectacular. And that's what you just have to enjoy. Now, the one thing that I love about Pu'er is that it's a tea that I can do. I work here at home. It's a tea that I can enjoy almost all day long. I have to stop around 2 or 3 o'clock, or else I can't sleep because, yeah, it does have a little bit of tea in it, and it will keep you up at night. Strangely enough, after a full meal, and usually ripe Pu'er does not bother me at all. So I don't know why that is. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this little tea making. There's something really unique about tea, and there's something that is just, I don't know, there's something restful, there's something mindful about drinking tea. There's, of course, a healthy benefit to it. The Tibetan monks did not drink coffee, they drank tea, and they drink tea because that's the only way your body can stay in meditation all day long, but your mind does not fall asleep. Coffee gets you, well, the jitteries, right? You rarely get the jitteries with tea unless, of course, you drink, a liter or something like that. So I hope that this gets you started on your tea journey. Remember that most of the time people don't like tea because oversteeped, much too hot of water. And go the Chinese and the Japanese way. Make it delicate and light before you get into the heavier teas. The heavier teas with fruits are probably a nice way to introduce yourself to teas. But the refinements of lighter teas is really where you're trying to get to. And I find it's the same thing with wine, by the way. These California super oaky wines were never really my cup of tea. Now, of course, I was raised in France where, I was used to Burgundy wines that are very subtle. But I think as you age, you tend to go more towards the subtle side of things. And yeah, that's about it. And yes, I am wearing a Tibetan shirt. Those are the shirts that they traditionally wear in Tibet. And they're really perfect for this kind of weather. And I see that now I must rush off to my next meeting. I hope you've enjoyed this. This is the Holistic Center podcast. My name is Nicolas Zart, and hey, I just like having fun and telling you guys about what did the ancient ones leave us as far as wisdom for us to use today. Thank you all. Please share, please like and comment, and give us a thumbs up because that really helps a lot. And next, who knows? We'll see.